In the great African continent, there have been countless tribes and kingdoms that have risen and fallen, many of which have been extensively documented about. But somewhere lost in the great sands of time are the Kushites and the great Kingdom of Kush. Even less talked about than the great kingdom are the Warrior Queens of Kush, some of the fiercest warriors to have ever walked on the African continent and the world at large. Welcome to Crazy History, where we bring you the craziest, weirdest facts from human history. Join us today as we look at the crazy life of a warrior queen in the Kingdom of Kush. Kushite daughters were bred for war. On the contrary to what most people believed about ancient civilizations, the Kingdom of Kush valued the female child as a warrior as opposed to the male child. Just like with Wonder Woman and her Amazonian sisters. The daughters in the Kingdom of Kush were trained early on to become warrior queens, but that process to rise the ranks in training did not come easily at all. Almost every aspect of the Kushite way of life was governed by the state. This, of course, included its children. Each Kushite female baby was brought before a council of inspectors who examined her for birth or other physical defects. If anything seemed out of the ordinary, they would take the newborn and leave her to die of exposure somewhere on a hillside outside the city. In a few fortunate cases, these forsaken children would be rescued by foreigners passing by or by slaves working the fields. In their infancy, the babies who survived this first of many tests would be bathed in wine instead of water, as to strengthen their physical attributes. The training involved hard physical exercises, as well as learning stealth, extreme loyalty, military and combat training, pain tolerance, hunting, survival skill, social communication, and morality. They were also taught reading, writing, rhetoric, and poetry. However, at age 12 they were stripped of all clothing and possessions. They were then instructed to sleep outside and make their own beds from reeds. They were also encouraged to scavenge or steal food, but if caught they were severely punished by flogging, hazing, and fighting among themselves. One way through which these children were toughened up as a key element in their development as soldiers were to instigate fights among them. Older men and teachers would often start various arguments among their students and encourage them on, leading the girls to start fighting with each other. Since the main purpose of the training was to make these trainees highly resistant to all sorts of hardships found during war, things as the heat from the North African deserts, hunger or pain, those who showed signs of weakness, cowardice, or timidity were subject to harsh punishments and humiliation by both peers and teachers alike. Imagine being bullied by someone in school, and then your teacher would come over and join in too. The contest of endurance. An integral part of ancient Kush, and one of its most gruesome practices, was the so-called contest of endurance. This tradition was said to commemorate an incident where people from neighboring settlements killed each other, and since then human sacrifices were brought there annually. Since Queen Sheba, however, the famous Kushite warrior queen who became a woman of interest to King Solomon in the 7th century BC, the ceremony at the sanctuary only involved the warrior queens being flogged until they completely stained the stairs of the altar full of blood. During the event, the altar was covered with cheeses and the young warriors would try to reach and take them. Older ones would wait for them with sticks in hand, flogging and beating them without mercy. This tradition was in fact an initiation ceremony where the women were accepted as full Kushite warrior queens. The last woman standing would receive great honor for her bravery. Deaths were also not uncommon during this event. They were part of a secret police force. When the warriors reached the age of around 20, those who were marked out as potential future leaders were given the opportunity to take part in a secret police force. This was a sort of secret police, or at least the closest Kush got to one. It more closely resembled a guerrilla force, since its main purpose was to stake out and terrorize the surrounding village settlements. At its peak during the 5th century BC, Kush had about 10,000 women able to bear arms, while the surrounding village population outnumbered them by 7 to 1. This was a double-edged sword for the Kushites. On the one hand, the villagers were providing the Kushites with all the food they would need, freeing them to become super soldiers. On the other hand, however, the Kushites were constantly under threat from rebellions from the surrounding villages. Every fall, these young soldiers got a chance to test out their skills when the Kushite leaders unofficially declared war on the surrounding villages. At night, the members of the police force would be armed with knives and set loose onto the surrounding countryside. They were instructed to kill any villager they encountered, especially the strongest among them. This annual slaughter of the surrounding settlements was to ensure the Helots' obedience, as well as to keep their population in check. Only the Kushites who took part in this gruesome event as young women could hope to one day achieve the highest rank of the Supreme Warrior Queen. Throughout the rest of the year, these secret police would patrol the countryside looking for any signs of unrest. Any potentially troublesome wandering villager would be summarily executed. Spartan weapons and armor. The bulk of every ancient African female army, Kush included, was the Times. These were heavily armored soldiers, citizens of their respective city-states, with enough material means to equip and make themselves available to fight. But while other cities' Timaces weren't professional soldiers and often lacked sufficient military training, Kushi soldiers were bred solely for war and did nothing else their entire lives. And while other African city-states built massive walls to defend themselves, Kush famously had none, considering its Timaces as its defenses. The principal weapon of every Times, regardless of origin, was the spear or dory. These spears measured some 8 feet in length and were held one-handed, either over or underhand. Its tip was made out of bronze or iron, and the shaft was out of cornel wood. This wood was especially sought after because its density and strength it gave the spear. It's so dense, the cornel wood actually sinks in water. Then in their left hand, the Timaces held their iconic round shields. Weighing some 30 pounds, these were used primarily for defense, but were also used for bashing. These shields were made out of wood or leather with an outer layer of bronze. Kushite warrior queens marked their shields with symbolism native to the Kushite land. Now, if either their spears broke off or the battle became too overcrowded, the Timaces in the front row turned to their ziphos. This was a short sword about 17 inches long, which was used for stabbing while behind their shield. Kushites, however, mostly preferred the kopis instead of the ziphos because of the nasty wounds it inflicted. The kopis was used more as an axe in the form of a thick, curved iron sword, and Kushites were often depicted in ancient art while holding one. For extra defense, they wore bronze helmets which protected the head, the back of the neck and the face, as well as a breastplate, thorax, of bronze or leather. No such thing as surrender. As part of their extreme loyalty training, Kushite warrior queens despised cowardice above all else, and warriors were expected to fight without any sense of fear whatsoever, even to the last woman, if need be. In effect, the act of surrender was seen as the epitome of all cowardice. In the highly unlikely event of a Kushite Times doing such an unthinkable thing, would most likely lead her to commit suicide. Kushite warrior queens were famous for saying things like, "Return with your shield or on it," to their fellow warriors just before going into battle, referring to them either returning victorious or dead. Kush only considered its debt fully repaid when its citizens died, doing their duty for her. With all that has been said, what do you think of the Kingdom of Kush now? Which part of their warrior queens' lives was the most shocking to you? Which ancient civilization would you want us to cover next? Tell me your answers down in the comments section. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also hit the bell as well so you don't miss any video, cause we have a lot more interesting things to come. See you soon.